Alright, let's be real. If you're watching this, you probably already know about Sonic 06. But for the 4 of you who have no idea what a Sonic the Hedgehog is and landed on this video because of a YouTube autoplay rabbit hole, how are those chores going? My name is Miss Fox, and yet I talk about cartoon hedgehogs. Is that fucked up or what? Sonic 06 is the fandom's name for a 2006 game simply titled Sonic the Hedgehog. Considering Sonic the Hedgehog is also the name of the series' main character and the original 1991 Sega Genesis game, we can assume some pretty lofty ambitions for Sonic 06. This is not a remake, a sequel, or a sub-series. It is the Sonic game. If you haven't played a Sonic game before, you can start with this one. This game will redefine Sonic for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 generation. Did it live up to those goals? Absolutely not. Sonic 06 was fraught with development troubles and rushed to meet a fixed deadline, and so it launched with sluggish performance and bugs galore. Playing Sonic 06 is an exercise in patience, not because of an innovative gameplay style that requires you to take the time to learn it, but because the controls will fight you the entire time and the game will struggle to render the next frame. The game performed so poorly that it forever stained the reputation of the franchise. For a while, it was all anyone could ever talk about, and even now, if a contemporary release performs poorly enough, it will inevitably be compared to Sonic 06, a game which is nearly 20 years old. For my part, I was young and stupid enough to believe that my struggles with the game were a skill issue and not a mark of the game being poor quality. As I said with Sonic Riders, Sonic was on the cover, and so the game must be good. Eventually, retrospective analysis of the game led me to realize the game really was shit. However, my dedication to actually learning the game, to play around its imperfections, solidified my place in the section of the fandom that believes there's something to redeem in this game. The gameplay and performance need a huge overhaul, sure, but there is something to be appreciated in the level design. On my second playthrough, I found myself appreciating the environments I ran through. With the awkward controls being second nature, I started to see a synthesis of a lot of the design philosophies I liked in the Sonic Adventure games. Interesting action set pieces mixed with more open level designs that accommodate skill and exploration-based alternate paths. The story wasn't too terrible. Sure, having Elise handed back and forth between Sonic and Eggman like a hot potato makes for an awkward story where the heroes keep fumbling their one job. And it's definitely not great that Elise's emotional arc about her repressed trauma culminates in her being told to just smile. But Silver being tricked by, and Shadow working to stop, a malevolent force trying to awaken a dormant god is actually pretty compelling. When it comes to remakes, it's usually the popular games that get the attention. To a degree, it makes sense because it's harder to market a game if it's already got the baggage of a bad reputation. There's an extent to which remakes are necessary in order to keep good games available. Technology changes, licenses expire, and occasionally design sensibilities need to be updated. I feel like I've mentioned this a lot recently. Even then, I'd argue that some remakes would be just fine as ports or remasters. There's a degree to which legacy can be a hindrance to how a remake can be perceived. For instance, I think Pac-Man World Repack was a necessary update because the original Pac-Man world is pretty sluggish and has gameplay moments like Anubis Rex that can be pretty unfair. Polishing those rough edges and giving the game a shiny new look helps preserve the initial intention while making the experience much more pleasant and accessible. However, when we look at the game's sequel, Pac-Man World 2, I start to question whether a remake is really necessary. Pac-Man World 2 isn't as sluggish as its predecessor, nor is there as much of a graphical jump to bring the game to modern standards. Aside from widening a hurt box or two on select bosses, or maybe making the flip kick slightly more generous, I don't know that there are any major physics or gameplay changes that would actually benefit the game. Assuming no effort is made to add in lost or scrapped content, would the effort of remaking even be worth it? Or would it simply end up inviting dozens of comparisons to the feel of the original release? Would recreating the physics engine with different tools make the game feel better, or just introduce new problems? Pac-Man World 2 has a good legacy and feels substantially more modern than its predecessor, and so I have trouble seeing a need for Repack 2 to be anything other than a remaster, a straight-up porting effort that ups the graphical fidelity and not much else. But you see, I don't have to ask those questions with Sonic 06. The game is, plainly, very bad. It released in such a poor state that it doesn't have a positive reputation worth considering for a remake. A bad game may not be a surefire success for a remake, but it's also a blank check to change basically whatever the fuck you want about it. And that's exactly what Project 06 does. If you're paying attention to the gameplay footage in the background, you may have already noticed that I've been recording off the fan remake this entire time. And this effort by Chaos X and their development team really does make a case for why we should consider remaking bad games. It's plain to see that the developers' philosophy behind Project 06 was to not tie themselves down to anything that sucked. They took the level design and the idea of what movement was supposed to be, and changed everything else. The gems aren't upgrades you purchase, they're secrets you find in the levels. Sonic isn't a sluggish nightmare, he's a culmination of the best aspects of his control style from the first two adventure games. He's got the Adventure 1 spin dash and the Adventure 2 lightspeed dash and bounce. Tails feels more like he did in Adventure 1 while also making the dummy ring bomb usable, and Knuckles and Rouge feel like their Adventure 2 iterations while fixing their added abilities from Sonic 06. For characters like Omega and Silver, well, shit was just straight up added to make them feel better to play. If this is what the original release had felt like, the biggest complaints would have only been the story and the fact that Sega forgot to add the Chow Garden to the game that is clearly Sonic Adventure 3. Shun Nakamura, the producer of Sonic Cross Shadow Generations and director of Sonic 06, has stated an interest in remaking 06. Whether that actually manifests is anyone's guess, but I do have a few thoughts about it. Firstly, if it does happen, some people are going to need to become a lot cooler about a lot of things really quickly. If coverage of an 06 remake mainly focuses on how bad the original was, if the articles and videos leading up to it reinforce how bad of an idea it must be, how close to the sun Sega are flying once again, well then the remake is going to have a massive uphill battle regardless of its quality. And the thing is, if No Man's Sky and Cyberpunk 2077 can triage their abysmal reputation through patches and updates, then we need to be able to give the same grace to an honest attempt at fixing Sonic 06. My other thought is that, ironically, Sonic 06 does have a reputation that needs considering for a remake. Because Project 06 exists and is as excellent as it is, it serves as some pretty fierce competition for Sega's in-house efforts. They've been beaten to the punch on making Sonic 06 good, and so there's an important option to consider. Now, Sega could pull a Nintendo and squash Project 06 like AM2R was, but that would be ill-advised. No, I think what they need to do is recognize the amazing opportunity right in front of them and pull the same magic they did for Sonic Mania. Sega should not, in fact, hire every fan who has a semi-decent idea, but they should strongly consider hiring the Project 06 team. The levels and physics updates necessary to fix Sonic 06 are already there. The main work left to finish is adding in the final story and side missions, including the hub worlds for the campaign, figuring out some story rewrites, and then remaking the cutscenes with new voice acting and animation to fit the changes. Maybe the multiplayer also needs to be added in, but I don't think it's fully necessary. I fail to see how this remake route, even with any kind of back pay consideration for Chaos X and the licensing cost of keeping the game in Unity Engine, would be more expensive and less successful than taking however many years of development to figure out how to remake Sonic 06 in-house. Now, not every bad or forgotten game has a fan base with dedicated modders and programmers who will lay the groundwork to fix them. But those games also don't have the baggage of a good reputation. There are dozens upon dozens of game ideas that, either because they made a poor impression or simply failed to find a substantial audience, lay dormant amongst the intellectual property hordes of large game companies. Some of these games even exist in a weird limbo where said companies don't even know they own them because of acquisitions and liquidations. Majesco Entertainment, for instance, could do some kind of remake of Drake and the 99 Dragons instead of letting the PC port sit forever on Steam making tens of dollars a year. The game has an awful reputation, but also had some amount of care put into world building and lofty goals based on the inspirations for its gameplay and aesthetics. In the hands of passionate developers, ones who have adequate time and resources to flesh out their goals and the creative freedom to find something that lets their game's original intention shine through, a remake could potentially turn around the game's poor reception. Similarly, Lady Sia, a game that I forever carry a torch for, is the kind of game that could do well with a second chance. I really do need to make a video on the game because I have a pretty deep personal connection to it. But, in very brief, it's a very charming and interesting Game Boy Advance game that, due to the financial situation at the development studio, fell into a bit of obscurity. There are some rough edges to the game, in part at least due to the hardware it was designed for. A remake with better screen real estate, larger, more detailed character sprites, a recomposed soundtrack, and some updated balancing and design choices could stand to do really well as an independent or AA game. With the right marketing and capitalizing on the wider spread gaming landscape, Lady Sia could be fairly successful. Not a household name, but well regarded amongst those more active in the indie game scene. Honestly, with the right team, I'd love to be one of the passionate developers who got to work on bringing Lady Sia forward into the current generation, but I'll save my full thoughts for a dedicated video. The point I really want to drive home is that remakes don't always have to be reserved for good games. Sometimes a poorly executed idea still holds potential. Rather than insisting every remake has to be this high-budget update that makes even more money than the original popular game, remakes can be part of what the AA space used to be. It doesn't all have to be Finals Fantasy and Tony's Hawk. It can simply be a forgotten or maligned game with no expectations and plenty of room for experimentation, something slightly familiar that lets developers try new things without the burden of needing to be a mega hit. With all that said, that's all the time I have for this video. What obscure or downright bad game do you wish desperately would get remade? Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you'll watch again in the next video. Also, if someone at Bandai Namco is somehow watching this, I will fully support you if you decide that this is your sign to try and revive Smashing Drive. I will go to bat so hard for a Smashing Drive remake.